Go, Doug. No, go up. Well.
We're glad to see everybody. All those that took the effort to come out to remember what took place. Kind of hard to, excuse me, kind of hard to believe. It's been a quarter of a century since this all happened. Those of you that come regularly, we all look a little older each year. Excuse me. I'm having a hard time with my breathing because I had a fall last night. I fell down some stairs and got hit in the back with some rocks that were on the ground. So, like I said, it's been a quarter of a century, 25 years, and looking around, it's good to see some new faces. It's also good to see all the old ones that have been coming regular. We thank you for your support and your condolences and all of that. And so we want to get into the program. I'm going to ask Kathy Wessinger. She's going to say a little bit about my daughter. I don't know how many know, but my daughter was planning on being here today, but she was killed in a head-on collision up in Pennsylvania about 3 weeks ago. People that were witnesses said it wasn't an accident, that it was deliberate. Young guy, drunk driver that, I don't know whether he was trying to commit suicide or what, but he tried to run a cop off the road, and I guess the cop avoided him, and there was a woman behind the next car after the police car. He aimed at her and missed her, at my daughter. She got it, excuse me, head on, and pretty much died instantly. So Ron and I just came back from Pennsylvania. We drove all the way up and drove back. We got back on Sunday, the very day that my daughter was supposed to land, you know. So Catherine Wessing is going to do a little memorial thing in regards to Karen, and then we'll get into some other speakers. And where's Catherine? There you are. You want to stand up so I can see you? Okay, I'm going to step aside.
So, a couple of weeks ago when we got the very distressing news about Karen's death, of course, we're very distressed. Okay, sorry. Anyway, so back in 2005 and 06, I was interviewing Clive for his autobiography, which Matt Whitmer helped me edit. And of course that year I was also interviewing Sheila and Bonnie Haldeman, so they all have autobiographies. And as part of that, in 2006, I went to visit Clive and I scanned his family photos. And so I was thinking, well, I've got the photos, so it would be nice to make a memorial slideshow for Karen. And I also went to Karen's Facebook page, and I took some some photos off of that. So those are the photos that are in the slideshow. And basically, these are family photos. And in Clyde's autobiography, he describes how when Karen was born, Karen was his older daughter. He named her after a character in the book Exodus by Leon Uris, Karen. And so it's been many years since I've read that novel and also watched the movie, but I started wondering, well, I wonder if the movie had some music for Karen. And sure enough, there is a song. It's titled Karen. So I downloaded the song, and I've attached it to this slideshow, and so that's what we'll be playing in memory of Karen.
There's a number of people that want to contribute to the program, so since I'm in no condition, I'm gonna let the others take over. I'm gonna ask Mary Winborn if she come up. She asked to speak on behalf of some of our supporters from way back, and Then we'll have Dr. James Tabor and Philip Arnold. They go all the way back to the siege. They were involved in talking to David during the siege and trying to get, it resolved peacefully, and that didn't happen. So we're here today to remember all those that didn't get through the siege, didn't survive. And I was telling some people, I said, KRLD from Dallas called me this morning, and they wanted to know, did I think the government had learned anything from all of this? 25 years later, have they learned anything? And I said, no. The only thing they've learned is not to have the press there filming all their mistakes and seeing what they do. And so, from what I can see, their attitudes are still the same. They think that they've given an inch or two over the years by saying, well, yeah, we made mistakes. But this year they've been stressing, well, you ought to do the same, and say, well, you made mistakes as well. And probably a lot of people made mistakes. But the biggest mistake was doing a dynamic entry when all you got to do is hand a warrant through the door, knock on the door and hand the warrant, or get, David downtown or whatever. We were friends with the Sheriff's Department here in Waco. Sheriff Harwell could have called David up and says, come down to the Sheriff's office. He probably would have went. And it could have all been just handled in a peaceful way, but they didn't want to do that. And we'll get into a bit more about that later, but we'll let Mary Winmore speak at this moment.
Can you hear me? No? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you to Catherine for using those pictures for my page. I really I'm glad that was useful. Anyway, I want to say just a few words about Richard Mosley, who did Day 51. Richard died December the 3rd in a hospice in Bridgeport, Texas. He was a very private person. He was born in Fort Worth. His name was Lewis Richard Mosley, and his dad was a preacher. He went to David Jones, I believe it was, no, Bob Jones University after the Marine Corps. And at some point, he was in California with a camera crew, working, making films. So that was a surprise to me. I didn't know that. I got this from his obituary. I don't even know that his longtime lady friend and fiance at one time knew that. But anyway, he was a very private person. He had bought some land out somewhere near Bridgeport, and this was going to be a place for people to go if there was an apocalypse, people he knew. And we haven't had that yet. We've had some hurricanes and stuff. Anyway, but one of the hills he named after Star, Koresh, Star Mountain. And that was very sweet. Anyway, Richard made Day 51 himself. He wrote that, he produced that, he directed that, he filmed that, he narrated that, and he got the music for that. And that's the first thing he ever did, and he assembled the equipment to do that, which is amazing to me. I was one of the first two people to see that, along with Diane Bogart, and he asked for critiques, and we gave him critiques, and he didn't take out the two things, but I understand that, having written some scripts now. Don't kill my baby, don't take out my stuff. That's my baby, that's what I did. But Richard had meant for any royalties on that to go to the Branch Davidians. And I don't know what happened with that. Did you guys ever get anything out of that? Yeah, they should. And now it's just out on the internet. It's everywhere. It is a work. It is a production. And if anything can be done, something needs to be done. And it will go on, you know. And it was very good, a very good, someone who has never done this before. Anyway, Richard will be missed. Is there anybody here who would like to say something about Richard? Rick, are you here?
Richard Mosley,
Yes.
he died.
Yes, he did. December the 3rd of 17 in a hospice. He had a long illness.
I only met him a couple times, and he seemed like a nice
You
guy.
want to say something to Mike?
No, I guess, did you know him well?
Not extremely well. I knew him for years and years, but nobody knew him extremely well.
I was here when he was, interviewing.
Why don't you say it to Mike so everybody can hear?
And Rick, where's Rick? You want to say something?
I met Richard in '93, and he was down here interviewing people and getting his documentary ready. He was working with Ron Cole. Is Ron here? No. Anyway, he seemed like a really nice guy. I thought he was from Oklahoma. Is that right, Mary?
No, it's Fort Worth.
Okay. But wasn't the Day 51 that they used facilities at KPOC or something like that? I think he said that at one point, but he was very professional documentary producer, in my opinion, and I will miss him. I didn't know he was dead.
Rick, come and say something.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Say something, or you
Yeah.
want to say
No, you say something, and I'm gonna go sit down.
something?
Yeah, Richard was a character. I don't remember having lugged around so much camera equipment for one guy, but I did have the opportunity to help him with some of his equipment. Once he got started on this Branch Davidian thing, though, I didn't hear what Mary said, but he really dug deep into a shell. He went totally inside of himself. Not too many people could dig and find out much. And I feel blessed that I was able to know the man for the short amount of time that I did. Mary contacted me and told me of his demise, and we've lost another good man.
Rick, say your name.
I'm Rick Donaldson. I've been involved with this thing since day number one. A friend of mine called me up the morning of the incident and said that I'd have a ride down here showing up at my house in 20 minutes. I still can't figure out who that person was that called. Got down here on the very first day, had a ATF agent point a gun at me, tell me to get the fuck out of here. This is none of my business. And it became part of my business. I was down here a majority of the 51 days. I had a farm that I had to run up in Rockwall County, but I was down here every chance I got. They moved us off, the BATF and Texas Rangers moved us away from the initial checkpoint and moved us up. We all moved up to a place that we called T-Shirt Hill. And from T-Shirt Hill, we had a good view across the many pastures. We could count cattle all day long. We couldn't really see much except the visual of the complex over the distance. I met a gentleman up there. I use the term loosely. Got into an argument with him, and all of a sudden there was like a sea of people that got between us and pushed me away. I later came to find that the aforementioned gentleman, his name was Tim McVeigh. he's very antagonistic up there on T-shirt Hill, and I'm glad I got away with my life. So I had a couple of interesting exposures in the very beginnings of this incident, and I, like a lot of you, would like to see the government pay for the damages that they made, compensate some of these victims, you know, for some of their egregious activities. I mean, there was no due process here at all, and that's our main thing. You know, we've seen how the fellas out west, you know, with due process, you know, they've been able to beat the government, but they absolutely had no due process here. And just like Randy Weaver had no due process. When the feds get involved, it's just go. So.
Well, you mentioned about the trees, and that was Karen's idea.
Mention about the trees.
That was Karen's idea.
Karen,
My understanding was planting the trees was Karen's idea based on the Bible.
okay, anyway, there was for every body that was lost out on the complex, including the 4 ATF agents, trees were planted. Now, I know this because another friend of mine and I dug every one of those holes and put every one of those trees in. And my years as a landscaper, I was never able to install an entire landscape, and what did we plant? 81 trees down there?
That's a lot.
And I didn't lose a single tree.
Then they moved it.
And then Charlie decided that he didn't like the way that it was arranged, and he moved them up to where they are now. But yeah, there was a tree for every life that was lost out there, and tears shed in every hole. I'm done.
What you mentioned about Karen and the trees, Karen wanted the trees planted. It's been a long time ago, but it was her idea.
And I think Rick just mentioned it.
Did he?
Yeah.
Okay.
For those of you that have television, you've probably noticed that there's been a huge amount of documentaries and movies and one thing and another, especially in the last 4 or 5 months. For some reason, the news stations seem to think that big numbers like the 20th or the 25th anniversary are, you know, more important or whatever to cover, and they get all excited about rehashing it. Unfortunately, most of what I've seen that's come out has not been very accurate. It has not been very sympathetic. The press seem to, in most cases, seem to go along with the government cover-up and present the story like the good guys came and the bad guys shot at them and people got killed, you know. What most people don't know is all the opportunities they had to do it right and chose their plan with the outcome that it ended up, you know, on day 1 and on day 51 and all the rest of it, with a great loss of life. I'm going to ask Dr. Tabor if he'll come up, and I think he had some comments on some of these programs that have been coming out, and see what he has to say.
Thank you, Clive.
Dr. James Tabor.
Thank you, Clive. So, good morning, everyone. I don't want to be too loud here. I look like a preacher with this big King James Bible, and
Amen.
I am a Bible scholar, so I guess I ought to carry on. but I'm a professor at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Don't get it mixed up with Chapel Hill. And Phil Arnold and I worked closely during the siege to try to communicate with FBI negotiators in particular, and finally with David Koresh and the Branch Davidians inside through various means, remotely mainly, to try to help the authorities understand the religious framework and system and presuppositions of this group. And what I want to say, I'll say something about the films, Clive, but I want to start with actually the First Amendment, which I'll read to you. I think everybody probably knows it, but maybe not by heart. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now that first phrase particularly is the one that we think about when we think about what happened here 25 years ago outside of Waco, Texas. There have been other examples in history, but this is maybe one of the more egregious. I think our president at the time, Bill Clinton, really had not thought through much what happened, because he made a comment in the Rose Garden the day of the fire. I guess this could serve as a warning to those who might be tempted to join cults. It's an amazing quote from the President of the United States, because it implies that either the President or the Congress or the government could perhaps come up with a list of legitimate and illegitimate religions. Can you imagine such a thing? We probably have several 100,000, we should need to ask Gordon for an estimate, of religious groups and communities and organizations. It's in the hundreds of thousands. Every individual has their own convictions, their own beliefs. It could be about the Bible, it could be about theosophy, it could be about anything, just your own worldview. And we're the one country that pioneered this idea that everyone has the free conscience to believe and practice whatever they're convicted of, whatever they believe. So to use the word cult, it's a nasty four-letter word. Now, Dick Revis asked me last night, have we won or lost on that battle? I wrote a book called Why Waco. It's basically cults in the battle for religious freedom. It's kind of a tricky title, because you could think, well, what is he saying? Like, we need to battle cults or what? Well, I think you all know what I meant by that ambiguous title. What I meant was, if we're going to have religious freedom, we need to get rid of this word. Because one person's sincerely held faith is what someone else would say, well, that's a cult. Now, if you define a cult as a high-demand religion with a charismatic leader and a group that thinks they have the truth and they're the main conduit of truth in the cosmos, you've just described probably about 75% of most more fundamentalist groups, and I don't just mean Christian. That's the nature of religion. Of course you think your religion's the truth. Why would you practice it if you didn't? We're not all Episcopalians, no offense. That's a joke. But the point is, Americans believe their religions. They will die for their religions, and people have died, of course, for religious freedom. So what I wanted to say mainly are there are two things that are the most precious to us, I think. It's that freedom of inquiry and thought and our children. I mean, we have to put it above country, but the country protects that. Now you could say, well, what about freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the other First Amendment things? They sort of go with it, don't they? And we don't want a government that comes up with a list of approved and disapproved religions. And I just think President Clinton hadn't really thought that out much. And he also had another quote that day that was even worse, about we're not to blame if a bunch of crazy people burn themselves up, which is really a horrible summary of what happened at Waco. So we've had 25 years to hash it out. I think what happened is actually fairly clear. We have here about 8 or 10 academic authors who've written very well-researched studies and books and articles. Many of you know these people who've thoroughly looked into all the material. And so I think the story is there for those who want to study it. Now, I'm not here to recriminate or blame people particularly. This is a memorial, isn't it? We all feel sad, and especially imagine with Karen on top of what we thought was going to be a 25-year anniversary, we have a 3-week anniversary as well. It's a horrible thing. But if you think about our freedom of religion, now if we break the law, fine. Not fine that we broke the law, but we all believe in a culture of laws. And I think one of the best quotes that all of us remember from David Koresh is when Henry McMahon called him and said, the ATF's asking about some of the weapons you bought. Tell them to come on out. Tell them to come on out. That's never hardly told or mentioned. And Clive already mentioned, call him, send the sheriff out, whatever. So I've got 3 words for you besides children and religious freedom. Unnecessary, unnecessary, unnecessary. The siege and initial attack, totally unnecessary. The way the 51 days were handled, totally unnecessary. And the last 3 days, which Arnold and I were involved in, and Phil's going to tell you the details of that in a minute, absolutely it would have ended peacefully. You say, well, how do you know that? Because I've talked to Kathy and Thibodeau and many others that were in there, and they told us about the jubilant mood that weekend. People were very happy on Friday and Saturday and Sunday until the attack. Here's my King James Bible here that I borrowed. You know, I study ancient Christianity, early Christianity and ancient Judaism. And I'm kind of shaking here, not because I'm nervous, because I'm trying to control my feelings here as I read. But we refer to this as millennialism. It's the idea that you find in the Bible and other religions. Catherine Wessinger edited a wonderful volume with Oxford University Press about millennialism worldwide through the ages. It's essentially a hope for a better world. The millenarian group, if you want to make it an adjective, is a group that has a vision for perfecting the world. In Judaism, it's called tikkun ha'olam, fixing the world. It's the idea that we are weak and flawed and even sinful, but that potentially humans are the most wonderful, beautiful creatures on the planet, and we could have a good world. So I just wanted to read to you 2 passages from the King James Version that I think were the banner visions for the Branch Davidians and many, many other groups. You can take these literally, figuratively. You could be a Zionist. You could take the kingdom of God as more symbolic. But a vision of Isaiah. You ready? It'll come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains and exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the Torah, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many peoples. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you go to the United Nations, back by the river, behind the building, there's a statue of a figure, a male figure, beating a sword into a plowshare, donated by the Soviet Union in the 1950s. If you walk outside the UN and look up on the wall across from the flags, this is quoted: "Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." So that's actually our cultural vision for a perfected future. And at the end of Isaiah, there's an expansion of this vision that I also want to, these are thin pages, Steve.
There's a card holding your place.
Yeah, I get it. "It shall come to pass that before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear." This idea of the intimacy between the divine and the human. But here's a description you'll remember. "For the wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock, and the dust shall be the serpent's meat. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." Now those two verses, I think, are essentially the millenarian vision of many, many groups. I mean, why be in a religion anyway? If it's just to leave this world and, quote, get to heaven and leave the world behind, that's one vision. But another vision is to stay here a while and see what we can all do to have our part in perfecting the world. I believe that the Branch Davidians were part of that history. They actually particularly love these verses, however they were interpreted. Clive, as far as the documentaries, I think I've interviewed with 6 of them, 5 or 6 so far. 2 of which are total interviews were cut out, Phil and mine. And so I'm not real fond of those, not because they cut me out, because they cut out the story of how this could have been resolved peacefully at the end. I do think, David Thibodeau's here, that the Paramount series, the 6-part series, is worth watching. David might want to say something about that. But, nothing's perfect. It's a scripted, acted series, but I think it preserves some of the story and the humanity of the people. So I think, is Arnold going to come up? Yeah. So Phil, why don't you segue with me on that millenarian vision? Thank you.
Life has a lot of sadness, a lot of suffering. But I think back 25 years ago, April 19th, the horror and sadness of that day certainly has affected all of us for all these years. And now, with Clive's most recent suffering, we seem to have a repeat of that pain, that sadness. And everyone in this room, scholar, critic, religious, atheist, Branch Davidian, media, FBI agents, whomever you are, you will resonate with the idea of pain and suffering as we, each of us, move through this vale of tears, as we lose members of our family, as we lose health, as we decay. There is a sadness in this world. So we have that in common, don't we? We all share that. That's a mutual theme that affects us all. So in this time of suffering, what do we do? Is there some place we go for some strength outside ourselves to get through this type of drama and trauma? I'm reminded of that passage driving up here from Houston, Texas, where I am located. in the Psalms, in Psalm 121, reading the King James Version again. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills. From whence cometh my help? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. I will lift up my eyes to the hills. Is there something represented by the hills there? Some kind of elevated experience that perhaps you have had, or that you draw upon for inspiration, that helps you to get through these times of suffering. I'm not here today to identify those particular hills, places that you go for refuge, but let your mind go back perhaps to the days of your youth. Perhaps there you found something that inspired you greatly. Perhaps it's a story that you heard, perhaps from the Bible, perhaps from history. Each of us has this different source that we can draw upon during these times of tribulation. It may be someone in history that you admire. Perhaps you want to go back to music that you heard that elevated you, that took you to a higher place. And during times of difficulty, we call upon those types of sources, these elevated experiences. Some of us might be, as being Texans, we might look to the Alamo. Or those of us who like ancient history, will look at Leonidas at Thermopylae and the 300 Spartans that resisted the Persians. These types of stories, myths even, give us a power to transcend the difficulties that we encounter as we go through this life. For some of us, the stories of the Bible speak to us deeply. And during these times of trouble, we go back, we call upon these stories of Moses, of Jesus, of Paul, and even other figures down through history. Joan of Arc comes to mind, the woman who stood against oppression as she understood it and drew upon her spiritual experiences. It seems to me there's a continuum. There are some of us who have deep and intense experiences of the Bible, of the stories of the Bible, of God, or whatever your spiritual source is. But this continuum, you find others who don't quite have it that vividly, that clearly, that strongly, but still those voices speak to us, no matter where we are on that particular continuum. And we want to go back to these roots during times of trouble. Don't let them fade from you. Go back to those times when you can gain power and strength from those things that you do recall that once spoke to you so loudly and clearly. Now on this continuum, we're all at different positions and different levels. David Koresh had a very vivid understanding of the source of history. He felt very close to the eternal, to Yahweh, to the power of God. Inside himself, he believed that he could see himself in the scriptures and in the prophecies of the Bible. Now, I don't claim to have those kinds of experiences. I don't know if any of the rest of you do, but on this continuum that we exist in, we can find places where this resonates with us. I remember when I heard about February 28th and the raid. The day after that, I began to realize, well, there are people there with deep religious faith. And there are people in law enforcement who are not going to understand such deep and powerful religious faith. It's going to be like two trains coming down the same track head on. There's going to be a collision. And so that was frightening. I mean, I realized it so clearly. And there was a sense of fear there. Oh, I really can't do anything about this, and maybe I shouldn't do anything about this. But at that time, I could hear the call of these stories that I had heard growing up. And I remember one of them in particular. A speaker one time was talking about the horrors of the Holocaust. And he said, if you were on the streets of Berlin or Warsaw in 1932, and you knew because you had a time machine and you could see what was going to happen at Treblinka and these other terrible concentration camps, and you knew what was going to happen, what would you do? What would you do? He said, would you go out on the streets and find a gypsy, a Jew, a Jehovah's Witnesses, and grab them by the lapel and say, you have got to get out of this city. Something terrible is going to happen in 6, 7, 8 years. Get your family and get out. He would look at you like you were crazy. But that moral imperative to save that person and his family would drive you to do it. So drawing on that source of strength, I felt I was compelled to come to Waco and try to help save lives. I approached the FBI. They were not interested in listening. 2, 3 times I went to them and had very, very miserable response from them. And as I contacted Dr. Tabor over the next weeks, we began to work through this and try to figure out what could be done in order to save lives. And as time went on, we learned more about the Branch Davidians. We were able to talk to some of them that had come out. Remember Livingston Fagan? He went to the jail here in Waco. We called them up on the telephone. They put us into Livingston. And then we began to be very much confirmed in our belief that you people had really studied the Bible, that you knew it backwards and forwards, and that you were following what you thought was the interpretation that God intended for you to have for these end times. Something that we did not believe or agree with, but yet we understood why you thought that. And we understood that law enforcement would not understand that whatsoever. So we began to realize that this whole thing was going to end in dismal failure and catastrophe unless there was a way to communicate with the Branch Davidians, David Koresh, and be able to maybe show that we were interested, that there was someone out here who would take him seriously and would listen to what he had to say, and maybe there could be some kind of dialogue, and maybe this would stretch out time, and maybe it would end peacefully. So we were able to go on the radio station with Ron Engelman up in Dallas, because we knew the Branch Davidians listened regularly to the radio program. And we got to a point where we said, we're just going to circumvent the FBI. We're going to go direct to the Branch Davidians by means of radio, and we'll see what happens. Ron Engelman said, yes, come on the radio program. So we hooked up the phones. He said, how much time do you need? I said, we're going to need your whole program, Ron. He said, my whole program? I said, yes, sir. He said, okay, you got it. If you think it may help save lives, you've got 45 minutes. So we went on the program, and we did not debate or argue or criticize David Koresh's interpretations. We simply tried to say, well, you know, the book of Revelation has 7 seals, and it has many mysteries in it. We'd love to talk to you if you would surrender, come out. We could get together and examine these things in a scholarly setting and see what we could figure out. We did, Jim came up with the idea, well, why don't we try to show legitimately that Revelation does have some prophecies that sort of stretch out time, that maybe it's not just going to be 1 month or 2 months of these prophecies that David is believing is being fulfilled, that maybe these prophecies are going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years. We based that on some Hebrew words and Greek words, and we showed some text. And it's because we realized that David really believed that Revelation chapter 5 and chapter 6 were being fulfilled. Chapter 5 deals with a lamb that can open the book that's sealed with 7 seals. Chapter 6 goes through the 7 seals, begins to go through the 7 seals. And we knew he was located in those seals, and he was following them as he thought they were being fulfilled right in front of him during that time. The FBI would have no idea what this Bible babble was all about. So we think that when David heard us on the radio, and later there was a cassette tape given to David with our radio program, so we knew he heard it, and Steve and other of the members. I think he began to think, well, there are some people that really want to discuss this in a serious manner with me. And so after we did that, we showed that maybe chapter 10 stretches out time some, because chapter 10 says the Lamb will prophesy again to many nations. A second prophecy that would be bigger and more grand than what was happening in Waco around February 28th through April. So we began to see that David was interested in this. Why do we know that? Because we do know that he began talking, giving our names to the FBI and asking to speak to us about these things. But to make the story short and to come to the main point, David produced a letter on April 14th. I have it here for you. He gave it to his attorney, Dick DeGarrett. There are plenty of copies up front for later for you. And he says here on April 14th, this is right after Passover season, and he says here that God has told him the waiting period is over with. The waiting period began early March, but now God has showed him that this waiting period is over with. And it's time to surrender, time to come out, time for the Exodus around Passover season. And David says, God has shown me an amazing thing. He showed me for the first time in human history, the mystery of the 7 seals will be put in written form and will be given to humanity. For David, this was an amazing moment. This was what the waiting period was all about. It was time to surrender, time to come out and give the message to the world. And he says, as soon as I finish writing it, I will give it to my attorney, Dick DeGarrett, and he will give it to scholars Dr. James Tabor and Phil Arnold. And when they give it to the other scholars of the world, when I see that activity taking place, I will come out with all the people safely. That was the plan. So he began writing and working on the first of the 7 seals. Maybe it would take 2 or 3 weeks to complete all 7, but he had finished seal number 1 with an introduction and a poem to go with it. We think by Sunday, and it was working on the 2nd seal. We know this, it's all in the negotiation tapes. I've heard all the negotiation tapes, 51 days, 15 hours a day. I've heard them all over a 2 or 3 year period. And he tells the FBI very clearly, and so does Steve Schneider, his right-hand man, that David has completed the first seal. He's working on the 2nd. I've seen 18 to 20 pages on his bed. And we need a word processor and some ribbon ink to be able to type it up and get it to you guys. And the FBI gives the impression they're going to wait. They give him word processor ribbon last night and encourage them to finish it. So here is the promise in writing that he's going to do that. What was David writing? Well, when Jim and I got it, we expected it to be more of a geopolitical sort of analysis of the book of Revelation to try to show what world power is going to be in conflict. It's not that at all. It's more of a revelation of what David thought was the presence of God's Spirit in the world. And by reading this revelation that he would produce, you would be able to tap into that Spirit and you would be able to see God in his beauty. You would be able to see the spiritual things of life so much better simply by reading it. Now, we don't have it. It wasn't produced except for the first seal with the poem in the introduction. We do have that. So David was working on that, and he said that as soon as this is given to the scholars, he will come out. So to understand what happened at Waco, you have to understand that there are these deep sources that people draw on for spiritual comfort and truth during crises. David Koresh really believed that he was in contact with the Spirit of God and he was being led by that Spirit. You may not believe that. I may not believe that. He believed that. And if the authorities had understood that, then they would not have triggered the unfortunate sequence of events which led to the eventual crises that cost the lives of so many people there. The authorities precipitated the crises and led to the deaths of all these people that were here today for this memorial. So David in that letter says that the scholars are to give that document. And he prophesies that that will happen. And today, we're going to give that document to the scholars and media or anyone that wants one. We have copies here. And that will be fulfilled.
Where's David Thibodeau? You want to come up and talk about the 6-part series that was based on your book?
Come on, David, get up here.
Everybody's been put on the spot.
Yeah, you're prepared.
You've been preparing 25 years, David.
As I say, start off, I'm really sorry about Karen and your loss. It's been on my mind for the last 3 weeks, pretty heavily. On a lighter note, it's good to see so many friends. I'd like to thank the authors. Dick Rivers really kind of started everything off with his book, and it's a fantastic source of information. Thank you for getting that rolling for us, Dick. It was did a great service to the community. I thank you. Of course, Tabor and Arnold. Why Waco, everyone should read that. Everyone has a different perspective. Mine is just a perspective of someone who lived through it and survived. I'm just an extremely lucky individual in the right place at the right time.
Stuart Wright.
Stuart Wright. Yeah.
Kathy.
I told you, I was not prepared.
Yeah, you
Kathy,
got it.
Yes, there's many great books out there from people that really struggle to research, get the facts, put it together. It's not easy writing a book. It takes many hours, much research. A lot goes into it for very little reward often. So anyway, thank you all. That's every little bit to bring people to the truth. The documentaries, the rules of engagement, and a new revelation I think are incredibly important as well. Those documentaries actually changed my life in many ways, many deep ways. Me being angry. So, before I forget, my mother, Belinda, wanted to say a few things to the community as well. She couldn't be here today, and she really, really wanted to be. So she says, I want to send my deepest and sincere greetings to the survivors, families, friends, and guests of our beloved, slaughtered Mount Carmel community. Can it truly be 25 years since the U.S. government set upon the community of families and individuals who were willing to take themselves away from the world in order to study and live a difficult and ultimately demanding system of religious faith? In the time I was in Waco, hoping that I might find some way of being of use to my son David and to bring him safely away from the federal government's assault on the community, I began to form a strong impression of this group of people who sought to live apart in their particular belief. This community braved every test in seeking the truth of their convictions, and sacrifices they were willing to make to be true to their vision was incorruptible. The impression I formed was a very human one. People strive to fill their brief lives with faith and meaning. These come in many forms and many levels of spiritual belief. Human survival is complex and difficult. Making sense of religion and human evolution requires a lifetime of search. There are so many possibilities for living our brief lives, and sadly, there is all too often deadly conflict for it. I am an outsider to the Mount Carmel community and its way of life, and yet I have come to understand on a very deep level the vital beauty and compelling vision the people were intent on committing themselves to. Much will be said on this memorial about politics and manipulations wrought against the community by the government It is my sincere hope that the words will weigh far more for the people who sought to understand their deeper selves at Mount Carmel. I hope all the loving and powerful words will be directed to the children, women, and men whose lives were stolen 25 years ago. Let your hearts be focused upon Mount Carmel, the dead, and what their lives stood for. Honor them with all your love and your desire to feel their presence with you today, as they are surely with you. So that's from my mother, Belinda. Thank you. And I had not pre-read that either, so okay. There's really two things I want to say. Number one is about the series. These producers got in touch with me many years ago, 5 years ago. This has been in the works for a very long time. I never thought it would happen, as all other series never happened. That's fine with me. I never thought that really television was ever going to do any service to the Mount Carmel community. I never thought anyone would ever be able to tell this story. And if they did, it was always going to be skewed or manipulated. So that always bothered me about a visual, other than having a book. You know, where someone like myself can give you just the experience they had. See, I'm going to get long-winded here, so let's just cut to the chase. I think that they did a very good job with the Paramount Networks. I was pretty proud of it, but it's definitely not perfect. I think you should read Clive Doyle's book, or my book, if you want to know kind of what really happened on the inside. I did not go out and bury Perry Jones in the front. That was Greg Summers did that, for those that have seen the 6-part series. And it was actually Peter Gent's body that he buried out front. And then he lined the dogs up so the world could see what the government did to our dogs. First thing, they shot the dogs before they shot at the people. And then they continued by shooting into the building continuously for that, for 45 minutes that morning, shooting at the women and children up top. So anyway, you all know what happened. I want to try to keep this about the memorial of the people. So I'm definitely going to be brief. I have just one more thing, though, that has really bothered me recently with all the documentaries that have come out. And that is especially the A&E documentary. And this is such an important point, that the A&E documentary was very good. It had interviews I'd never seen before, that it was very fair, stories I had never heard from people that knew David and knew some people in the community. I was impressed. And I remember watching, this is A&E, and I'm like surprised. I was getting like something I haven't felt in a while for the media. It was hope, it was a warm feeling here. It's like, oh my God, they're actually doing something right. And then of course, the end of the A&E documentary, where they have the FBI people who were on the ground that day, and they said, I don't understand why the adults in that building didn't bring out any children. One of the adults even brought out a dog, but he couldn't bring out the kids. And then shows another FBI agent, we know this was a mass suicide. It was just a mass suicide from a religious fanatic. I'm paraphrasing. And that's the end of the documentary. That's how they chose to end the documentary. So in this very public forum, I'd like to refute all of that. It makes me incredibly angry that you people would have the gall to come to that conclusion and continue to taint history to your own skew of how you want Mount Carmel to be viewed. History is going to speak for itself. History is history. People will find out the truth. If it takes another 100 years, the truth will come out. And anyone that has done the kind of research or any of the professionals that have written books know at this point what really happened at the back of that building. When the rules of engagement was being put together, I had a chance to go in and see a very good quality of the infrared video from the plane flying above Mount Carmel. And you see a couple of flashes, flashbangs, but more importantly, you see two shooters either side of the tank shooting into that building. And for years I wondered, why did the autopsy report show 15 of the members had bullet wounds to the center of the head and the center of their chest? Not conducive of suicide, it's more like a homicide. It's more like being shot. There was a mystery to me. I didn't even want to believe that my government would shoot people trying to exit that building when all they said that they wanted to do was save people and help people. And then I saw the infrared. 2 tanks, 2 shooters next to each tank. I think they counted something like 98 different fully automatic weapons fire going into the building over the course of those last few minutes. 98 gunshots. How can you save women and children if you're being shot as you're trying to exit the back of the building, folks? How does that work? So again, it's the ultimate slap in the face for them to say that it was a suicide when we know there were shooters out there. I would like just to say publicly, any of the people involved in that firefight, I would like to talk to you. I would like you to give me a call and tell me what really happened. Without judgment, without anything. I want someone to confront me and tell me why they were there and why they shot people trying to exit that building. What is their justification? I'd like an apology from the government. It's 25 years, it's about time. These people have been covering history, covering their butts for the last 25 years. Clive Doyle needs an apology. Everyone, myself, I need an apology from these people. Kathy Schroeder needs an apology for what these people did.
Yes?
I don't even care about money. Just acknowledge you did it. Anyway, it's out there. That's my main focus today. No one ever talks about the infrared anymore. People don't talk about people being shot at the back of that building. You never hear it. I'm not going to stop talking about it till you guys take me out. So,
Remember Jimmy Riddle?
here I am. Remember Jimmy Riddle? They ran over his body with a tank. I'm a very big target, FBI. Come and get me, because I'm not going to shut up. And you guys, think seriously. It's time. Thank you. So I just want to. That's really the only point I wanted to make. Again, this isn't. To me, this day isn't really about me or even the great speakers. It's about the people that died at Mount Carmel. People we can't bring back, but are a part of history, and they're stars. They're stars in a much deeper way than we think of as stars. They're very special. They died for what they believed in, and they stood up with courage for what they believed in, when many people don't. And I just think that should be honored instead of being made to be some kind of just cultish, freakish thing. It's so much deeper. And I wanted to leave, actually in my epilogue, in the book that I wrote an epilogue for the paperback version of my book. And in the epilogue I talk about the kids, especially any kids. There's been many of David's kids that have survived. Well, there's not many. There's a few that I have never met or talked to. And so I'm speaking to them directly, and any other children, like Kevin Jones, for example, who were kids that were in Mount Carmel and came out during the siege. I just want to let you know that your parents weren't as freaky and crazy as the press has led you to believe that they are. These people, whether you believe it or not, I don't care what you think about your parents or David Koresh or what happened there, these people loved you. And they're not crazy. They just were willing to die for what they believed, and they put everything on the line. And you should feel special. And I want them to know that I think of them often, whether they know me or not. I know that Clive thinks of them often. And that you are loved, even if you feel alone in the world, you're loved by us, whether you know us or not. And I just want to say, if any of you ever want to reach out to me, I will be there for you. And that's how. Thank you. That's important.
It's 20 after 11.
A lot of the things that have been said could probably have been gone into in more detail. Somebody said, what about Jimmy Riddle? Jimmy Riddle, from what I heard, was in the cafeteria area when one of the ferret rounds was fired in, hit him in the face and knocked him down. The documentaries that were made rules of engagement, new revelation, and the Flare project were all an ongoing work by Mike McNulty. Mike McNulty called me just a short time before his death. He says, we're still researching, still investigating, way after, years after the three documentaries came out. He says he was planning on reworking the second one, the new revelation. He says, I'm going to take a little bit out of it. He says, because I found so much more stuff that I want to include in a second edition of it. People may think we're crazy. People may think that they got away with what they did. And we're not the only ones being persecuted. It wasn't because we were a crazy cult, or we had a weird religion, or we were just plain, there for the taking. All of the people that have befriended us, supported us over the years, have been targets as well. Sheriff Hartwell called me on the phone. He said, I've got to talk to somebody. He said, I can't talk to my family, but what happened out there really bothered him. So he said, can we get together for coffee? I want to talk about the kids. I want to talk about what went on during the siege. And I never got to have coffee with him. He died. Came up dead. I've heard stories, I can't prove them, but somebody said when they went and found his body, there was blood all over the walls. It doesn't sound like a heart attack or a stroke. Yeah. The Davidians have been here in Waco since 1935. We're not new kids on the block. The trouble with Waco is if you're not a Baptist or a Catholic, you're a cult. We've got, people up at the Homestead Heritage. They're considered a cult. We got people down at Lot, the Mennonite or Amish type background. They're considered cults. I worked for about 8.5 years at the Waco Health Food Store, and my boss died, and his wife decided she was going to close the business down. And a lot of our customers used to come up to me and say, well, what are we going to do for health food and get our medication and stuff. And I said, well, this Homestead Heritage, I said, they grind their own flour and they make cheese and all, homemade stuff. Oh, we couldn't go out there. It's a cult. I says, but you go out there every year. They have an open house once a year where everybody's invited, and Waco goes. I guess it's a weekend that nobody's got anything to do. So they all go out to Homestead Heritage. They put on a concert and they show you how they farm and bond raising and all the rest of it. And people enjoy it. But they don't enjoy the people because they're a cult. We couldn't do business with them. We couldn't go out there and buy our products from them on a regular basis. So, I understand prejudice. I was raised in a prejudicial situation. I'm from Australia. You hear all about what goes on in Northern Ireland between Protestants and Catholics. It went on where I lived. Prejudice and hate is not natural. It's taught. The children learn it from the adults. And, people don't want to consider anybody else's religion. They say, you come over here and they say, well, there's two things you can't talk about, it's politics and religion. Why not? Because nobody wants to give an inch. Nobody wants to consider the other guy's opinion or his beliefs. Because they've got this ingrained hatred. It can be based on race, it can be based on color, language you speak. In Australia, where I lived, the Irish Catholics and the Protestants fought like cats and dogs until Australia started bringing in immigrants from Europe. And the first big batch they brought in was from Italy, all of which were Catholic. But the Irish Catholic couldn't get along with the Italian Catholics. So all of a sudden, the Irish Catholics are banding together with the, Australian Protestants because they couldn't deal with people of their own faith. The problem wasn't their religion, it was their language. And the fact that a lot of the Italians would carry knives and pull them on you at the drop of a hat, It's a penal colony. I still got the chain scars on my ankles. Actually, I got them from coming over here.
Sorry about that. This government's not mine.
Amen. When I was up in Parkland Hospital in Dallas, I had all the skin taken off my left leg to do the skin grafts. I laid in bed every day with ankle chains on. I had two ATF agents outside the door, and none of the windows opened in my room. But they were scared to death I was, going to run off and escape or something. I couldn't even walk in the mornings, because when they take the skin off your leg, it draws up every night to where one leg's way up here, and it takes you half an hour to get it straight enough to get out of bed. I don't know where I was going to run to. The government have treated us so callously, I'd say. Individual ATF agents, individual FBI agents, I don't hate them. I feel sorry for a lot of them because they don't know what they're doing. They don't realize who's pulling the strings that make them do what they do. I've talked with many FBI agents. We've had some of them at the memorials. I said something to somebody the other day. I says, if David Koresh did anything for me, it gave me the ability to talk to anybody, educated, uneducated, law enforcement, professors from the universities. We got a story to tell. Christians in general had a story to tell beginning 2,000 years ago. But that story's not being told. They were not told to go out and teach the storybook Jesus gospel. They weren't to go out there and talk about a little baby in a manger and a guy that did miracles for a few years and then died on the cross. That was not the gospel. The gospel that they were commissioned to go out and share was this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness. It wasn't just a story. It was something that was to take place and to happen and to bring peace to the world. But nobody's teaching that. Even the ones that talk about a kingdom don't know when it's going to be or who's going to be involved in starting it or whatever. They don't have the facts. One of the prophets that we had many years ago said, when the gospel is presented in its fullness, many, many Jews will accept and come into the kingdom. But it's not being presented in its fullness because it's not visible. It's not here. And unless you have the kingdom, you won't have all the prophecies in the Old Testament being fulfilled where all nations are gathered in. The book of Daniel talks about in the last days, it's going to be a judgment. It talks about the nations that rule over God's people, kept them under bondage, for hundreds and hundreds of years. It says, but when the judgment sits, God will take away their dominion. That's the dominion of these nations that rule over God's people, whether it's Russia, China, or America. He'll take away their dominion, the land that they rule over. These nations don't rule in heaven. They rule down here. Going to take away their dominion and give it to the saints. People say to me, well, what's going to happen to America? Is it going to be destroyed? The end of the world coming? Most times the media want to write you up as where calamity howlers, the world's sky's falling and the world's coming to an end. The world's not coming to an end. This is what God made for man. He didn't make heaven for man. You know that? I know it's comforting at funerals and everything to think, well, Joe Blow went straight to heaven when he died. But that's not scriptural. Paul wrote in the book of Hebrews. Paul says in Hebrews, and he names this list of patriarchs and historical figures from the Bible. I'm just shortening it up. He says, all these died in faith, not receiving the promise. See? If you read the book of Revelation, which is basically the book with the 7 seals, talks about a New Jerusalem. We're not going to heaven to live in it. It's coming down here. It's going to be the capital of God's kingdom. God made this earth in the beginning and he gave it to Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve were told to replenish the earth. Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Fill it up with people. So, religion, Christian religion, Protestant religion, whatever you want to call it, they've kind of got their sights screwed up. They've lost sight of what the gospel was all about and what their purpose for being Christians, following Christ. If we're following Christ, we've got a long way behind because he's way out of sight. We're not following Christ. David made a statement years ago. says God and Jesus are figments of people's imagination. Because everybody gets horrified. They think that's blasphemy. He didn't say they didn't exist. What he said was, our concept of them is in our heads. They're figments of our imagination. Everybody that goes to any church, hears a sermon or whatever, process it in their head at whatever level they're able to comprehend or to take note of. In other words, many Christians are still in kindergarten, doing finger painting and learning the alphabet. It's good to be born again. But Peter and Paul and Christ and all of the rest of them says you can't stay that way. If you keep trying to breastfeed or bottle feed a baby forever, never get them on solid food, what happens? They get sick and they die. That's the way Christians are. They're dying for lack of food, lack of real understanding. God's been trying to get through to people for 6,000 years basically, but especially with Christians, they've had 2,000 years to get their act together, you might say. Learn the lessons that the people in the Old Testament didn't learn in their day. That's what Paul says. He says, don't look down your nose at the Jews. He says, they're special. To them were given the oracles of God first. He says, but they didn't bring forth the fruit in their day. And he says, so God allowed the gospel or the message to go to the Gentiles. It says it's like a wild olive branch being grafted into the original olive tree. In other words, the Gentiles were supposed to join the Jews, be grafted into their tree, and they got the chance to bring about the fruit that the Jews didn't do. And Paul says, don't get uppity. Don't think you're special. If you don't bring forth fruit, you can be cut off again and, discarded. It's a whole lot easier to be grafted into the original tree than grafted into a wild olive tree. You can't have the kingdom without the Jews, you know that? You got to have them there. It's predicted. Book of Revelation talks about a group called the 144,000 that stand on Mount Zion. Guess who's the first on the list? 12,000 people from the tribe of Judah. But the world can't see that. They don't want that. We think that the Holocaust during World War II was probably the worst thing we'd ever heard of. But pogroms and persecution of religious groups has been going on since the beginning. I mean, long before Hitler, they had the Spanish Inquisition. They had pogroms in Russia. A lot of the people that came to this country as immigrants were fleeing religious persecution in Europe and other countries. We opened our doors to all those people. Now we want to close them. We only want America for Americans. That's the way it seems to be coming across in this day and age. This room is full of people that are all different. They don't have the same religious background. Some may not have any religion at all. My mother used to tell me that we were supposed to be Presbyterian. We never went to a Presbyterian church in all my days, when I was a kid. no religion in our house at all until I was 9 years old. I was invited to go to a Baptist Sunday school at 9. It's the first time I got a taste of the Bible or religion. About a year later, some neighbors of ours came over, and two oldest daughters of the household came over to our place, and they says, there's something going on down the end of our street about 3/4 of a mile away. They said they're putting up a big tent, and we want to go, but our parents won't let us go unless we got a chaperone. So I asked my mother, would she take him? I'm thinking, I'm a little kid, you know, I'm thinking big tent, maybe a circus, you know, let's go to the circus. We get down there and it's a Seventh-day Adventist evangelistic series, you know, tent put up on a vacant lot. That's the first time we really started getting into the Bible. So we became Seventh-day Adventists. And they prided themselves on being biblical students. The church had studied, things like that, you know. And they taught prophecy. Made us interested. So we joined. And the desire to learn didn't just stop the minute we were baptized or joined the church, which is basically what they wanted us to do, is you join and you become part of the crowd that are just warming the benches, you know. In my case, my family, we got the learning bug. We wanted to keep learning. So we studied everything that came along. End up becoming Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. And when David came along, we got to see the Bible in a whole different light than we'd ever had before. But we'd been studying for years. David was just a Johnny-come-lately, you know. He wasn't some gifted speaker. I guess the thing that appealed to me was he was kind of like me. He was a high school dropout. He was a guy that wanted to become a surgeon. But in Australia, you had strict educational laws. What the government did in Australia back in my day, they would figure out population growth. They'd figure out how many more they had this year than they had last year, cutting out all the ones that had died and adding all the babies that had been born and so on. They figured it out. And so they figured, well, we could graduate 10 new lawyers, or 10 dentists, or 10 surgeons, or whatever. They figured out what population of the city or the state could handle without them all going, you know, hungry and not making a living. And so you'd get hundreds of students that go to the university to become a doctor or to become, you know, some other profession, school teacher or whatever. And the way they graded was, if they figured they only needed 10 for whatever department, whatever, profession, the first 10 papers that they corrected that passed were sent through. And all the rest of them didn't even get looked at. You had to go the next year and try to take the exam again, and if there was room for you to be included, then you'd get to pass. But you could sit there for eons, just trying to find a niche to fit into. So the things we were learning in the religions that we were involved in gave us hope. It wasn't based on all these people that were good or that had passed some kind of curriculum, graduated from church school or whatever. Everybody could go through. You could all pass. You could all go into the kingdom. Gave us hope, And so, like I said, when David started teaching, he made the book come alive. He held a Bible up one day. He says, without the Spirit of God, this is nothing but cigarette paper wrapped in a cowskin. That's all the Bible is. It's a book. If the Spirit of God's not involved in giving the understanding, and if you're not involved in getting the understanding, pursuing it and comprehending it, and both sides of the equation have to be inspired. The teacher has to have the gift, and the listener has to have a gift. They're not one and the same, but it's from the same Spirit. So you've got to want to learn, or you probably never get it. It's going to be Bible babble, as the FBI said. It always made me wonder how bright the ATF was when they picked Robert Rodriguez to be the guy that supposedly was an infiltrator, which he really wasn't. An infiltrator is one you don't detect if he's good. We knew right along we were being watched from the house across the road. We knew right along that Robert wasn't a conduit. He says, well, he told us, he says, when they told me that I was going to be the one to go over there and befriend all the people at Mount Carmel and go to Bible studies and all that. He says, I'm a Catholic. Not a good Catholic. I don't go to church or anything, but I'm born a Catholic. So he says, I figured I'd better find out where these people were coming from. So he went to the drawer in the dresser at the motel he was staying at, got their Gideon Bible, and read the book of Revelation so he'd be on our level. And I thought, that's kind of bad attitude, or an ignorant attitude, because we've been studying the book for years and we're not experts. See? What David taught was every time God had a prophet, a messenger, if you didn't understand what was being said, you were advised to go to the messenger and ask him what he meant. You don't go to his enemies. You don't go, downtown, talk to everybody else and say, well, what do you think of this guy or what he's talking about? You go to the messenger. And if and when that messenger dies, all that he said and all that he wrote becomes sealed. That's what the book sealed with 7 seals is. It's the whole Bible, really. All the books of the Bible meet and end in the book of Revelation. So the survivors have a sealed book again. It's not being freshly opened at this point. We'd hoped and believed that, all those that died in the fire would come back eventually. They'd be resurrected. Or else, God would have to raise up another prophet to go any further than what we've come so far. The way David taught things, and the way all prophets do, is when they're given information, they reason in their mind, why is God telling us this right now? It must be time. It must be the time for it to happen. in the process of it being time, they figured, well, I must be this particular character or individual that's mentioned in the scriptures. I must be this Elijah character or the two witnesses or whatever. There's all kinds of prophets running around this country claiming to have these titles. King David, King Solomon, you know. And it may sound good to them, and they may be sincere. They may want to be something. But the titles belong to the Spirit, and the Spirit will give it to who she will. See? It's not something that you can drum up on your own. It's a calling. And it's all because of the people that came out of Egypt.
We've got a couple of people that might want to speak before we bell is on.
I'll wrap it up in just a second. Forget where I was now.
People called out of Egypt.
Called out of Egypt.
People that came out of Egypt under Moses went to Mount Sinai. You've all seen Cecil B. DeMille's movie, you know, the Ten Commandments. The real story behind the movie, or before the movie, was that they get there and God comes down on the mountain to talk to them personally. Puts on a big fireworks display. Earthquake, smoke, brimstone, you know, lightning and thunder, and scares the daylights out of them. Scary God. So they tell Moses, this God, he's going to kill us. We'll all die of a heart attack. So they said to Moses, don't let God talk to us. Tell him we don't want him talking to us, because we'll all end up having strokes and heart attacks and whatever. They says, and I'm paraphrasing, you be the dummy that goes up there and talks to him. If you fall down the crack in the ground or get molten lava all over you and die, it's better that one die than the whole nation perish. You've heard those statements before, right? They said the same thing about Christ 2,000 years ago. So Moses goes up the mountain and he says, God, they don't want to hear you. They're scared to death of you. You're frightening them. So God says, oh, so they don't want me to talk to them? Okay, we'll go to plan B. I won't talk to them anymore. I'll talk to them through a prophet. You see? And then a prophet will be the medium. He'll be the go-between. It says from now on, that's the only way I'm going to talk to the people of Israel, or the people of the world for that matter. And so he's been doing that ever since. Most Protestants decide they didn't want any more prophets after John. There's a scripture that says that, but they don't, sometimes you question them and they don't know which John they're talking about, whether it's John the Baptist or John the Revelator or just what. But Christ said there was going to be prophets all the way up to the last days. So God, it's good news. God's still talking. But you got to be willing to listen to it. So anyway, who you got over there?
Commercial message first.
A commercial message first?
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, you want the mic too?
Just to be heard. Well, of course, first of all, we want to thank Helen Marie Taylor and the Helen Marie Taylor Museum of Waco History for allowing us to be here today. And this museum has been operating at a loss for over 25 years. And one of the ways they gather money from the state and the city is to have signatures of people who have visited this property to show that they are doing a good work for the people. Outside this door is a little podium. It has a piece of paper on it. If you can write your name down, write your city. You don't have to write your phone numbers and addresses because nobody likes stalkers these days. I don't know why. And they have DVDs that have the basic presentation of Waco, New Revelation, along with some Pat Robertson stuff because he introduces it. But the information in that is factual and is close. Also, Tommy Cook in the back is holding up some CDs that are computer MP3s that have about 14, 15 hours of David Koresh's studies and some of David's music, which I hope you all would find interesting. That's about it for my speaking. I had a special request.
I wanted to mention if we don't have enough copies of the manuscript, we have a few.
Okay.
We will put it up online.
Okay.
And the website is my name, jamestabor.com.
jamestabor.com.
So we'll put it up and it'll say Waco and you can download it yourself.
Okay.
If you don't have a computer, you can get it from us.
Get it from them.
booklet
Yeah.
form.
After we eat, is it possible for people to go upstairs and see the exhibit?
That's probably a good likely possibility. William, the caretaker of the property, is right outside this door. He would have a better answer, but I think Helen Marie would love for people to see that. As far as speakers following me, there's only a few minutes. I've had a special request from a good friend of the survivors, Bob, that a friend of his named Kelly would have a few minutes and perhaps a political statement. So if you're political virgins, close your ears. If not, pay attention. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kelly Stewart. 2 years ago, I didn't know what Waco was. I didn't know what Ruby Ridge was. And then I learned about it all through the events of down in Oregon at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge, when a group of individuals tried to do what I wish many people had done here in Waco, and that is they went to stand for a family, the Hammond family, that was being abused by the federal government and being targeted. What I just want to say here today, first, I was there witnessing the trials, and due process was not received. 2 years waiting for your speedy trial. A man shot on a back road with no cell coverage, which was Lavoy Finicum, shot 3 times in the back, is not due process. So my question to you is, did the federal government learn anything? And are we just here to remember, or is there anything that will ever change from the events that have happened? I want to tell you that I don't believe the federal government has learned a thing, unless you want to talk about them becoming more deceptive with their informants learning more about the people they're infiltrating, deceiving the public even more, owning the media even more. They have learned nothing. If we look at Ruby Ridge, he was a white supremacist who was hiding guns and took his family up to an isolated area. If we look at Waco, we have a cult with guns. If we look at Bunkerville, we have Cliven Bundy, a white supremacist, sorry, not a white supremacist, but a racist who refused to pay his cattle grazing fees. Then we have the Wildlife Refuge, which were armed militants who took over a federal building. If you guys want to know where those false narratives came from, you have to look around the room at anybody holding a press pass. Because a very wise person, we have 2 levels of protection in this country, and that's the 4th branch of government, which is the people, and that's the media. And David Fry said at the Wildlife Refuge, when they were under siege there and they thought they were all going to be killed, that the media was supposed to be the watchdog of the people. They're supposed to go places we can't go. They're supposed to tell the public what's happening so that the government, when it leaves the confines of the Constitution, will be held accountable. The media is the first line of defense that has failed us in this country, and I believe that the blood of many patriots across this country are on their hands. But the second line of defense is the 4th branch of government, which is we the people. To the people who experience this tragedy and wonder why did it happen and did anything change, I want to tell you that many lives have been since saved because of the sacrifices at Waco. When I learned about all of this 2 years ago and I got to know the Bundy family, the thing that I continued hearing over and over from the people who showed up in Bunkerville in 2014 to protect the Bundys is, we will not allow another Waco to happen. So when I look at these faces up here, I see Mel Bundy, and I see Dave Bundy, and I see Ammon and Ryan and Cliven, and I see their 25 children that would have been without them had they all been massacred on that day, on April 12th, 2014. So I want to tell you that the media has learned nothing. They continue to isolate and demonize and destroy. I want to tell you the federal government has learned nothing. They only have more tax dollars to continue to grow farther and farther outside of the confines of the Constitution. But I want to tell you that we the people, we have learned something. And Bunkerville is an example of what was learned when they were put under siege, when snipers were pointed at the Bundy family. They could have all been massacred that day, and I absolutely believe they would have, had this tragedy not happened and had people not witnessed this as the fourth branch of government and said, where the hell were we? And in 2014, because of these faces up here, they showed up. And they showed up armed, they showed up principled, they brought their families and their children, and they were on horseback, and they stood, and they told the federal government no. And Cliven Bundy even told them, hell no. So we can sit here and just remember and think that all is lost and there isn't hope because the media continues to fail us. They continue to be the lapdogs of the federal government instead of the bulldogs of the people, as David Fry said.
That's right.
We can believe that, but we can also remember and believe that we the people, everybody in this room, minus the federal FBI agents, everybody in this room is the fourth branch of government. And one thing that I'll leave you with in saying that the people have learned, though the media and the federal government has not, my question for you would be, what will you do when the next attempted Waco happens? Because it will happen, right? We can go back to Wounded Knee and Trail of Tears and Bunkerville and Ruby Ridge and Malheur Wildlife Refuge. We can go back to all those. And the times that people didn't die was Bunkerville when the people showed up. And they showed up as a defense, not as the aggressors. They showed up in defense of the Agent Dan Loves, who had the kill list and the suicide brag books. These are things that our government agencies are doing that we are allowing them to do. When we show up and we're principled and we defend those in need, this doesn't have to happen again. But when the next attempted Waco happens, each one of you and the media in the back, you have another opportunity to do what's right and to save lives. I'd like to say that due process was given in Bunkerville, but there's still 3 individuals in prison, one of which for 56 years. Lavoy Finicum was killed. There's 7 people still in prison from the Wildlife Refuge. There were some victories, but there have been many, many defeats if you want to look at justice. But at the end of the day, it's in our corner. The ball is in our court. We can sit around and be upset about what the federal government did, but we all know what the federal government will do. Why? Because they're tyrants. Tyrants will be tyrants. The question is, will the media start telling the truth? Will they stop isolating and demonizing and destroying people and calling them cult and white supremacists and armed militants? Will they tell the truth and humanize these people so that those of us at home watching from TV can then rise up as the fourth branch of government and hold our elected officials accountable and say, absolutely not. Not on my watch. Not in America. That's not what our flag stands for. Our flag only stands for freedom if the fourth branch of government protects that freedom and holds their government and their elected officials accountable. So to all the people here who lost their lives, all of these lives and more so were spared. Hundreds of people showed up in Bunkerville. And again, the theme I heard over and over and over was, I came because I wasn't going to let there be another Waco.
I just want to say something in behalf of the media. Back in 1993, when the ATF and the FBI were having their daily briefings to the press, there were individual journalists of one kind or another that would raise questions. And I've been told numerous times that if you dared to speak up or to question anything that they were saying, you were asked to leave and your credentials were revoked from coming back the next day. We've had other journalists that have told me over the years that they were writing articles sympathetic or raising questions back in '93, and back at whatever newspaper or whatever that they worked for, they were told, you don't write any more articles on this subject. If you do, you will be fired. So there are some that have brought things to light, that have spoken out. Dick Revis is one that's we've known Dick for a lot of years. We respect him. And there's others that basically were taken out of their jobs or removed or had their articles changed, edited. You know, they were not allowed to complete the reporting that they felt was needful for the people to know the truth. And you know, if writing is your job, that's your bread and butter, and you're not allowed to write, then you're in trouble financially. They blackball you. And so there are people that have stood up and said things. Like I said, every once in a while, some of these people have had their lives taken from them. Ron Engelman, you know, Sheriff Howell. Sheriff Howell told me on the phone just a little bit of what he wanted to talk about when we went to the coffee shop, which he never made. But he said the FBI negotiated a meeting. They wanted David Koresh to come out and talk to them up near the front gate during the siege. David didn't come out. He'd been wounded, he was in bad shape. So Steve Schneider and Sheila's husband, Wayne Martin, walked up all the way up to near the front gate. The agreement was they were to meet with Sheriff Howell and an FBI agent, unarmed, on neutral ground. They were scared to death, or they claimed they were scared that we would shoot them if they got any closer to the building. So Steve and Wayne walked all the way up to the gate, and lo and behold, in comes this armored vehicle. And they parked in such a manner that you couldn't see the hatch at the back. They wanted to lure Steve and Dave over. Sheriff Howell told me, wanted them to come over around the back of the tank, which would be on the opposite, you know, out of sight from the building. And the plan was that they would grab them both and arrest them. When Sheriff Howell found out that that's what they were going to do, he says, "Oh no, not on my watch. This is not what we agreed to." So he jumped out. Made the FBI mad. So they went over and they met with David and Wayne, and all of a sudden all these agents jump out of the back of the Bradley vehicle, and surround them with their guns pointed at their heads. You know, people say, why didn't you come out? Why didn't you do that? Fear, for one reason. Lack of respect for another, because it lied and double-crossed us, you know, time and time again throughout that 51 days. They were throwing flashbangs at anybody that came out to pick up supplies or whatever. There was an old lady at Mount Carmel that David told she had to go out. She was crying. She didn't want to leave. He said, well, you need medical attention to your feet. You've got to go see a doctor. The minute she got outside, the FBI was screaming at her, lay down on the ground, take your coat off. You know, we want to see if you got any hidden weapons and all of this kind of. She was an old lady. It's no wonder people thought, well, if we come out, what's going to happen to us? Jimmy Riddle came out the back. We mentioned him before. Jimmy Riddle came out the back. There was a message from the dairy up the back where the snipers were saying, oh, there's a guy come out the back with a backpack on. Oh, he's walking past the swimming pool. He's reached the corner of the gymnasium at the back. Oh, he fell down. That was the end of their message. Oh, he fell down. If you fall down, you get up. I fell down last night. I got up again. But Jimmy Riddle comes up dead. They said, oh, he shot himself. He blew himself up with a hand grenade. And he's got, you know, about half of his body missing. And it just so happens that one of the tanks we had out the back throws a track. The track comes off the cogs, you know. And it's got red material stuck in it. Why didn't people come out? Like David was saying, they were being shot at in the back. They were shooting from the dairy. They were shooting from across the road. We've brought a lot of this stuff up in other years, but we got so many people that are here today that, you know, weren't at the other memorials. But the only way the world's going to change, if it does, is to be re-educated. People say, oh, you guys were brainwashed in there. David brainwashed you. I says, well, I probably needed it. Probably had a dirty mind or something, you know. I needed a brainwashing. In Ezekiel, God says, when you get to the kingdom, everybody's got to go through a brainwashing. You're going to get a new heart. They're going to be washed with clean water. It'll be harder to sin at that time than it is to do the right thing now. We need to be changed. We need to go through a process, whether you call it brainwashing or not. Everybody else is being brainwashed every day with commercials on TV and public school and, you know, buy this product, buy that product. And it must work because they keep putting it on. It's paying for itself. But if you get brainwashed by the Bible, then you got to be crazy. Anyway, I think it's about time that we go through this process of remembering those of it. Sure.
What was the eloquent young lady's name?
Kelly Stewart.
Kelly Stewart.
Kelly, I disagree with you on one issue. We are not before the stage. We are the people. When we relegate ourselves to a position that looks like the government, we lose our status and our power. There are 4 organic documents of the United States of America. The first is the Declaration of Independence. That is our document. That is where our Creator endowed us with unalienable rights. And the most important right that we got from the Declaration of Independence is the right to own property. And we instituted governments among men for one purpose, and that is to protect the people and their property. Do we really have a government? Does this government protect us and our property?
No.
My study is in war powers, and I have gone back and looked at the documents instituted in the 1860s that allow this massacre, that allow Lavoy Finnegan to be killed. They can do anything as long as they have those war powers to us that they want, and we are the enemy. We are the belligerents. They can kill us, they can tax us, they can build a huge force. It's not just, you say the enemies, the FBI, the BLM, the agencies. We don't even know how many agencies this country has. Have no idea. Could be thousands, could be hundreds, we don't know because there are so many. But we, the people, hold the power. And there's one thing these people are afraid of. There's one thing that takes their power away. And I wish, like Clive says, that people could be educated, but we don't have time. But there is one thing that takes their power away, and that is the people saying peace. In all their documents that allow them to do this, it all ends if there is peace. And the American people can say, we want no more. We do not consent. We will have no emergency powers. The emergency is over, and we want peace. I've circulated a declaration of peace here today. It is so important that signatures go on there because Francis and his Secretary of State are waiting to sign off and support the American people in their quest for peace. And we need to do it.
At this point, we're going to read the names. Kathy Wessing is going to read the names. Marlene is going to do the gong. And when we get through, Sheila Mott's going to put on some lunch for us. I don't know how long I'll stay around. I may choose to go to the hospital and get x-rays.
Well, as you know, the fire started, or at least the fire became visible at 12:07 p.m. And so this is the time in the memorial where we read the names. Clive has read the names all these years, at least once he got out of jail. And we remember each person who died. Clive always also remembers the 4 ATF agents, and because those lives are lost also, and their families miss them. And Matt put together this slideshow. It's a beautiful slideshow. So. Winston Blake was British, and he was age 28, and he died on February 28th. Clive talks about somebody telling him, you know, after the shooting stopped, or maybe it was during the shooting, someone told him that Winston was dead, and Clive went into his room and saw him lying on the floor. The window of his room was right behind some plastic water tanks, so apparently the gunshots came through the water tanks, punctured them, and hit Winston. Peter Kent from Australia, age 24. He was on top of the water tower during the shootout, and so he was shot and died. Clive talks about how the men went up to, or he helped the men go up and get Peter's bodies down. I've read the FBI log. It's a compiled log, and you have negotiators who were logging and other agents who were logging, but the negotiators logged that the Branch Davidians were looking for Peter Gibb. They didn't know where he was, and it took them a while to figure out that his body was on top of the water tower. He was scraping it clean. They were getting ready to fix the pump so they could start using the water tower again. Peter Hitzman, American, age 28. He also died on February 28th during the shootout. Harry Jones, 64 years old. He was David Koresh's father-in-law. He was standing directly behind David when he went out on the porch as the ATF agents were running at him, telling him whatever they were saying, and gunshots started, and David backed inside the door, but Perry was standing behind him and was hit in the abdomen. Clive came down the hall and he describes Perry crawling along the hallway, screaming in pain and clutching his abdomen. So Clive helped him to one of the rooms, put him in a bottom bunk bed. Clive went off to help other people, so Perry died on that day. There's a dispute about the autopsy. The autopsy did not show that he had a wound to the abdomen. And Clive says he wished he had actually looked at the wound, but he knew Perry was clutching his abdomen in great pain. And of course, those disputed autopsies could not be checked because the cooler that the FBI agents brought in for the bodies from Mount Carmel, somehow it got turned off. So those autopsies could not be checked. Michael Schroeder, age 29. He was at the car repair shop down the road when the shootout happened. He decided he wanted to return and be with his family members and his friends. And so he was walking a long way around with, I think, 2 other men. But Michael was the youngest, so he was up front, and ATF agents said that he shot at them, but whatever happened, Michael was shot and killed. And this happened, I think, about 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and his body was left there for a few days. And so with all of the many deaths at Mount Carmel, his death was not sufficiently investigated. Jadine Wendell, age 34, American, mother of 4 children. She was up on the 2nd floor with the other women and children, the mothers of the children, and I'm not sure. I read Kathy Schroeder's testimony not long ago, so I'm not sure if it was Kathy who said that that Jadine went back inside into her room, left the kids in the hallway. The moms were protecting the children in the hallway, and Jadine went back inside. And she was a trained policewoman, so it's possible she might have been returning fire. But at any rate, she was shot in the bunk bed of that room. Yes, so we remember the 4 ATF agents who died. Also, Conway LeBeau, excuse me, I'm sorry. The agents who died, I believe, were from New Orleans, or the New Orleans office, which is where I go. Todd McKeon. Robert Williams, age 26. Steve Willis, age 32. You can see photos of these 4 young men online. We didn't include their photos because we don't have permission to use those photos, but we remember them also. Kathy Andrade, American, age 24. She had a daughter with David Chanel. Chanel Andrade, age 1. Jennifer Andrade, 19, Kathy's sister. I was just trying to remember the story. I know there's a story about him, but it's not coming to mind. But Ulrich George Bennett, he's British, age 35. Susan Benta, British, age 31. Mary Jean Vorst, American, age 49. I remember meeting her son at an earlier memorial. I think that was the 10th memorial. I'll just mention that when we didn't have a photo of the person, Matt used a rubbing. He went around to all of the stones with each person's name on it, and he made rubbings. And so that's what you're seeing up here is a rubbing for each person for whom we don't have a photo. So Pablo Cohen, Israeli, age 38. I'll just mention that I've listened to one of the bug tapes during the FBI assault on April 19th. And in that bug tape, you hear Steve Schneider he tells Pablo Cohen to go outside and show that the telephone line to the negotiators had been severed, it had been run over by a tank. Then he tells Graham Craddock to go out, and I think it was actually Graham who went out and did that. But so Pablo Cohen was right there at the front door, and he died in the fire.
I talked to his mother in Israel in '93. Others are
Okay, Abdullah Davies, British. He was called Davo, and he was from Nigeria. Sherry Doyle, American, 18, Clive's younger daughter. Beverly Elliott, British, age 30. Doris Fagan, British, age 60. She's the mother of Livingston Fagan, who was the last Branch Davidian to come out during the siege. David explicitly sent him to come out and explain the Branch Davidian theology to the FBI agents. I emailed Livingston recently, and I said, well, were you able to explain theology to them? And he said, no, they weren't interested. They were more interested in logistics, the layout of the building and so forth. But as we heard earlier, James Tabor, Phil Arnold spent a lot of time talking to him on the phone, and I did have the opportunity to meet him in London. And so this is his mother, Doris Fagan. Yvette Fagan is Livingstone's wife. She was 32 when she died. Lisa Marie Ferris, American, age 24. She met David in a music store in California. Raymond Friesen, he was Canadian, age 76. Sandra Hardile, British, age 27. Zilla Henry was the mother of the large Henry family. It was the mother and her children who were at Mount Carmel. So Zilla Henry was age 55 when she died. Diana Henry, one of Zilla's daughters, was age 28. Stephen Henry was 26. Paulina Henry was 24. Philip Henry was 22. Vanessa Henry was 19. Novelette Sinclair Hissman. Novelette was Bonnie Haldeman's best friend. As many of you know, Bonnie Haldeman was David Koresh's mother. When the Branch Davidians were living in a camp outside Palestine, Texas, Novelette and Bonnie shared a bus. They were living in school buses out there at the camp. And Bonnie and Novelette had a cleaning business together. And she was Canadian and age 36 when she died. Floyd Hauptman came from Massachusetts, as did Sheila Martin and the Martin family, and he was age 61 when he died. Sherry Jewell came from Hawaii, and she was age 43. David M. Jones, he was one of the children of Harry Jones and Mary Bell Jones, and he was the US mail carrier who ran into a cameraman who was lost that day on February 28th trying to get to Mount Carmel to film the raid. And he went back and warned David Koresh that a raid was coming. At that point, I don't think they knew what agency was going to carry out the raid, but they knew that a raid was coming. David Jones was 38. David Koresh, age 33. Rachel Howell Koresh was David's legal wife. She was 24 when she died, and she was the mother of 3 children. Cyrus Howell was their oldest child, and he was age 8. His hair was always long. Apparently, when David Koresh was younger, he didn't like to cut his hair, so he didn't make his sons cut their hair either. So that's why you have these little boys with such long hair. But Cyrus was 8. Star Howell was was their next child. She was the middle child, and she was 6. And Bobby Lane Koresh was the 3rd child, and she was 2. Jeffrey Little, I believe they met Jeffrey Little in Hawaii, and he was 32 when he died. Nicole Jet Little, she was one of the 2 pregnant women who died in that fire, and both of the pregnant women miscarried at some point during that assault. So of course their babies died also. So Nicole came from Australia. She was the twin sister of Peter Gent, and she had a son, Dalen, and a little girl, Pages, and the 3rd baby was on the way. Dalen Gent was her oldest child. He was another little boy with long hair. I've been looking at the videos titled Inside Mount Carmel that you can see on YouTube, and I recently saw Dalen. He was a cute little boy, age 3. Pages Jen was age 1. And we remember the 3rd child that was miscarried or trauma-born, and who was born and died during the assault and the fire. Livingston Malcolm was British, and he was 26 years old. Diane Martin was not related to the Martin family that we know well. She was British, and she was age 41. Douglas Wayne Martin is Sheila's husband, and he was a Harvard-educated attorney. And on February 28th, during the ATF raid and the shootout, he dialed 911, begging that the shooting be stopped. And so he did his best to protect his family. He was 42. Sheila and Wayne had 7 children. The 4 oldest children died in the fire. This is Wayne Joseph Martin, and he was 20. Anita Marie Martin was 18. Sheila Renee Martin was age 15. And the 4th child who died in the fire is Lisa Marie Martin, and she was 13. John Mark McBean, a young man from Britain, and he was age 27. Bernadette Monbelly, I often show her to my students, or if I'm giving a public lecture, I will show her. She happened to come, I think she was maybe the first one that was interviewed in the Inside Mount Carmel film, and she had a lot of cogent things to say, and at the end she gave a very perky smile, and she reminds me of my students. She was British, and she was age 31. Rosemary Barson from Britain, she was 29. Melissa Morrison was Rosemary's daughter, and she was 6. Sonia Murray from Britain was 29. Teresa Nobrega, I remember seeing her on the Inside Mount Carmel video as well. You know, if you look at that film, which is on YouTube, you see thoughtful people. You know, they're not brainwashed cultists. They're thoughtful, faithful adults, and a lot of cute children. Teresa was age 48. James Riddle, or Jimmy Riddle. Jimmy was Clive's best friend in the community. Bonnie Haldeman also was very fond of him. She called him her traveling buddy because, you know, the Branch Davidians did travel to work and also to spread the word. And he was 32 when he died. Juliet Santoyo is Ophelia Santoyo's daughter, and she died in the fire along with her 5 children. Juliet was 30 years old. Audrey Martinez is one of Juliet's children. I believe she's the oldest, and Audrey was 13. Abigail Martinez is the next daughter of Juliet Santoyo, and she was 11. Joseph Martinez is Juliet's next child, and he was 8. Isaiah Barrios, another one of Juliet's children, he was 4. And the youngest child is Crystal Barrios. She was age 3. Rebecca Sampea, I think we have Rebecca's 2 sisters here, and she was from New Zealand, and she's was 24. Steve Schneider, you hear him a lot on the negotiation tapes. He was from Hawaii. He attended graduate school in religious studies and maybe had a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. I think a master's degree. He was 43 when he died. His wife, Judy Schneider, she had a daughter with David named Marion, and Judy was age 41. And this is Marion Schneider, who was 2 when she died. Clifford Sellers was from England. He was the artist of the group, and he was aged 33. Scott Kojiro Sonobe, Japanese American. I think he also came from Hawaii, and
He's on that tape too. It's very impressive.
yeah, and his daughters, or their daughters, have been here for the memorial, and I know Clyde loves them very much. He was 35. His wife, Floricida Sonobe, everyone just called her Sita, and she was 34. Greg Summers, I think he also came from Hawaii to Mount Carmel, and he was age 28. Aisha Garfa Summers, she was the second pregnant woman who died, and she did have a daughter named Startle, and Aisha was 17 when she died. Startle Summers was age 1. And then the trauma-born infant who never got a name. Lorraine Sylvia, they called her Larry. She was good friends with Sheila, and she was 40 when she died. Her daughter Rachel Sylvia was 12. And her youngest daughter, named Hollywood, was 1. Michelle Jones Thibodeau, married to David Thibodeau, legally. She had 3 children with David Koresh, and she was Rachel Jones's younger sister, and she was 18 when she died. Serenity C. Jones was her older daughter, and Serenity was 4 when she died. Her 2 younger daughters were twins, and so one was named Chica Jones, and she was 22 months old when she died. And her twin sister was named Little One Jones, also 22 months old. Margarita Vega, she's was the wife of Neil Vega, and they sent their daughter Joanne out during the siege, and Margarita was 47 when she died. Neil Vega, I guess he originally comes from New Zealand because that's where he's buried. David Koresh, I believe, met him in Hawaii, and he was aged 38 when he died. Mark Wendell, or with my South Carolina accent, I tend to say Mark Wendell. I'm not sure which is correct. He was married to J.D. Wendell, and he was 40 when he died. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Sheila, you ready for lunch? That's the end of our program, memorial program. We invite you all to stay and share some food with us, and get to know each other. There's a lot of you that I don't know. You can come up and introduce yourselves, and one of these days, these memorials will be over, hopefully. Either because I'm not here anymore, or it's all over, period. 25 years, quarter of a century. It's hard to believe. Okay, that's it. We'll get you to pick up some trays of food. See you.
Yeah, I do.